Chinese shipbuilding capacity is over 200 times greater than that of the US. The US ability to repair and build ships does not even register versus China. The US Navy is lucky to build 3 to 4 ships per year. The Chinese can build 8 to 12 ships per month. If you support the US intervening in Taiwan and think that this would have anything to do with the ideas of freedom or liberation, you are a clown.
大家好，我是小满。在讨论大国军事博弈时，我们经常会被一些表面数据迷惑，比如谁的航母吨位大，谁的军费开支高。但现代战争的底层逻辑究竟是什么？今天我们要看一位西方独立博主的深度硬核长评，他完全剥离了西方媒体的政治正确，用极其冰冷的工业数据、供应链逻辑和地缘常识，论证了一个在西方极具争议的观点：在西太平洋的常规冲突中，美军必败无疑。在这期长达10几分钟的分析中，没有情绪输出，只有赤裸裸的现实。高超音速武器对传统航母的降维打击，中国200倍于美国的造船产能，占据绝对垄断地位的稀土提炼技术，以及全要素的制造业动员能力。可以说，这是一场用数学和工业对好莱坞美式神话的彻底解构。准备好你的耐心，让我们一起看看这位西方视角的观察者是如何拨开美元霸权的底裤的。
The United States has long had a reputation for having the most powerful military in the world. It spends more on its military than any other country in the world by a massive margin and maintains hundreds of bases spanning across the globe. To justify this bloated existence, the US military is constantly searching for new enemies. Over the past 20 years, that mission has increasingly centered on containing and countering the rise of China. But the overwhelming reality is that the United States military is not built for the 21st century and would certainly lose in the event of a conflict with China. In today's video, we'll break down the 7 reasons why the United States would be defeated by China if it ever came down to a conventional war. Now let's dive in. The first and most critical reason for why China would win any potential conflict is location. China has no interest in projecting its military across the world and has defined its international partnerships using trade instead. It only has one external military base in Djibouti, where 7 other nations have a base due to its critical shipping location. In contrast, the United States has 750 bases across the world. Even when its direct interests are threatened in conflicts like the war in Iran, China chooses to remain isolationist. As a result of their lack of a worldwide military presence and a committed, non-intravenous foreign policy, any potential conflict between the two countries would be defensive for China in nature. It would almost certainly take place off the coast of the Chinese mainland, whether it be in the South or East China Sea. China has no interest nor designed their army to fight off the coast of San Francisco and would only have to focus on defeating the US presence in East Asia. The Pacific Ocean takes up 1/3 of the world's surface. US supply chains to rearm, repair, and restock would have to traverse nearly 2 weeks from US to reach Asia. Meanwhile, China would be running their naval and air force operations from ports and airfields very close to the actual fighting. This trans-Pacific supply chain reliance alone makes this conflict nearly impossible, but only more variables stack on from here. When people talk about a US-China war, they might imagine it would look something like World War II, with US and Chinese ships in the Pacific Ocean having large naval battles in close proximity to one another. They might imagine the US would be able to have a secure foothold on regional islands from which they could direct operations closer to the Chinese mainland. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, American ships wouldn't be able to come close to the Chinese mainland. That brings us to the second point on why America would be defeated, and that's hypersonic missiles. Hypersonic missiles are one of the most important weapons of the 21st century. They are capable of traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5, which is 5 times the speed of sound, or over 3,800 miles per hour. These weapons are so devastating because they move so fast that they are essentially impossible to defend against. With modern satellite imagery, these systems can achieve accuracy within just a few meters. And Chinese missiles also have post-launch maneuverability that allows them to adjust to moving targets. There are also variants specifically designed to destroy naval ships called carrier killers. This means that anything within thousands of miles of the Chinese coast is well within the range of these missiles. As a result, the US Navy would not be able to come close to the Chinese mainland without effectively guaranteeing the sinking of its ships. US military power projection is almost completely reliant on aircraft carriers. But in a conflict with China, these would be rendered completely obsolete, as they are essentially slow-moving giant targets for hypersonic missiles. With aircraft carriers out of the picture, the United States would have to rely on proxy bases in Japan, Korea, and the Philippines. But these bases would look like the face of the moon within hours of a conflict starting after a massive barrage of hypersonic missiles. They would become completely inoperable, unable to launch any sort of missions within the first day of the war. It would be nearly impossible for the US to assemble any kind of naval or troop presence within hundreds of miles of China because of the threat posed by these missiles. Despite this reality, you can still see US war games about this conflict as if the US still has the ability to maneuver ships close to China like it would have been able to in the past. In reality, the United States would not even be able to show to the fight. Just look at how effective Iran has used hypersonic missiles against the United States. In the Middle East, US carriers have not dared to get even close to the Iranian mainland due to the threat posed by these missiles. Within the first 4 days of the conflict, Iran, using drones and missiles that are far less sophisticated than what China possesses, was able to strike numerous bases across multiple countries in the Middle East with near impunity. These strikes severely damaged or completely removed these bases' ability to carry out missions and took out key US assets. They destroyed multiple US radar systems across the region that were key installations in directing US operations and tracking Iranian launches, leaving the US essentially flying blind. Iran also destroyed US naval rearming centers, removing the ability for vessels to restock at these bases and forcing them to detour to much more distant naval facilities. In addition, Iran destroyed 4 of the 8 global THAAD missile interceptors. These THAAD batteries are incredibly difficult to replace and were one of the only defenses against these missiles. Even then, they had less than a 10% success rate against some of the more advanced Iranian rockets. Not only did Iran massively hurt US offensive capabilities in the region, they caused huge financial blows as these radars and THAAD launchers cost billions of dollars and were taken out by Iranian drones and missiles, costing a fraction of the price, at just tens of thousands of dollars or less. Iran has achieved all of this in just 1 week. Now just imagine what China could do with a far greater missile capacity in both technology and quantity. China also has an air force on par with the US, which would make it extremely difficult for US planes to run missions anywhere near the Chinese mainland, as they are currently able to do in Iran. US jets only have an effective range of a few hundred miles. Without aircraft carriers or secure landing strips in the region, the missile threat also takes much of US air capacity out of the picture. The third reason why China would win is naval capacity. Even if US naval ships were able to get within operational distance of the Chinese mainland, China has numerous naval advantages over the US. There are 2 metrics when gauging naval strength. The first is naval tonnage, which gauges the overall weight of the fleets, and the second is the number of ships. The United States has the most powerful navy when measured by the tonnage metric, but this is largely a result of their 11 clunky supercarriers, which, as we have shown, would likely be more of a liability than an asset. When measured by the number of vessels, China's navy leads the world by a large margin. China has the world's largest fleet of warships, made up of ships that are specifically designed for the purpose of countering the US Navy. These ships focus on submarine hunting, digital warfare, and launching and destroying drones. On the other hand, US carriers and fleets are still designed for the 20th century and contain many vessels that are decades old. These ships might have been incredibly effective in operations like those in Iraq, but have not been tested in the 21st century against a peer adversary. But regardless of firepower, the biggest nail in the coffin of naval hopes is this visual here. Chinese shipbuilding capacity is over 200 times greater than that of the US. The US ability to repair and build ships does not even register versus China. The US Navy is lucky to build 3 to 4 ships per year. The Chinese can build 8 to 12 ships per month. This is during peacetime too. During an all-out war scenario, China could significantly ramp up production of ships at a far greater rate. In any conflict, US ships that are damaged would have to limp over the entire Pacific Ocean back to San Diego. Even when getting back to the US simply does not have the capacity to repair or build ships in the needed timeline of a conflict, likely taking months. Meanwhile, Chinese damaged ships would only have to travel a short distance back to port to get repaired. The fourth reason why China would decisively win this conflict is because of China's dominance over drone technology. It is consensus among modern military analysts that drone warfare has completely transformed the battlefield and is one of the most important aspects of modern militaries. And Chinese drone technology is by far the best in the world. China has the world's top drone companies and largest talent pools. The country already has nearly 2/3 global market share for both consumer and commercial drones. Brands like DJI dominate the market because competitors simply cannot meet the quality and price point. In the event of war, the production of these drones could easily be converted into military applications. Many models are already being converted by both Ukrainian and Russian forces en masse. China has already unveiled prototypes for drone motherships with the ability to autonomously fly and deploy hundreds of smaller attack drones. These drones are also not just limited to air. They also have naval submersible drones that have the capability to seek out submarines and other naval ships on their own. In this critical drone warfare theater, China has a production capacity, technological expertise, and price point that the US cannot come close to competing with. Before we get to the fifth reason, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, please support me on Patreon. I just got laid off, and I would really like to keep this channel independent and not have to talk to sponsors. So please, if you'd like my work, it would really mean a lot if you click the link below. I can only do this with your support. All right, now back to the video. Now take a second to think where everything is made these days. Everything is made in China, which brings us to the fifth reason why the US would lose this war, and it's because it cannot come close to competing with Chinese manufacturing capability. This factor is the base of the pyramid for everything already mentioned. Any potential conflict between these two countries would require a full commitment from their societies to win. And the United States simply does not have the industrial capacity to win this war. The US private for-profit system could never compete with the Chinese state-led approach. The US is dependent on private weapons contractors to deliver its weapons. It's far more profitable to sell the fanciest, most precision high tech that takes years of developments and billions of dollars than it is to mass produce $50,000 drones or shells. As a result, the military industrial complex in the US is a bloated, corrupt system where nothing is made on time or in the quantities needed. Meanwhile, the Chinese army is much more reactive to the actual needs of the battlefield. If a certain number of drones or missiles is needed, they simply order manufacturers to produce it, regardless of cost or profitability. Even if the US were to direct these companies to produce, the US can't come close to competing with Chinese industrial capacity. China currently represents more than a third of the world's entire manufacturing production, and that number is expected to increase to nearly half of the world's total manufacturing by 2030 at 45%. If the conflict with Iran continues, the United States is expected to fully exhaust crucial missiles such as interceptor rockets as well as Tomahawk missiles in a matter of weeks. This conflict pales in comparison to what a war with China would look like, and demands for arms would be magnitudes greater. According to military experts from the United States, the US military would run out of missiles needed for a war with China within a week. They'd have to magically replenish them across the entire Pacific Ocean from non-existent factories run by companies who have no capability or incentive to produce them. At the same time, China would never have to pause between deploying munitions and producing more. It could convert its entire productive capacity, representing nearly half of global manufacturing, towards the war effort. There would be no interruption in its ability to sustain this conflict, and it would only have to deploy munitions a few miles from its own coast. While manufacturing capacity may be the base of the pyramid of a potential conflict, there's actually a further base beneath the ground that underpins any country's ability to wage war. And that's our sixth reason why China would win, which is rare earth minerals. Let's say the US magically was able to catch up to Chinese industrial capacity. They still wouldn't have the raw materials needed to fuel those factories. All modern technologies, from batteries, electric vehicles, solar panels, to most importantly, all forms of modern weaponry, require large amounts of rare earth minerals. These minerals you may have never heard of and all have complicated names, but they are the backbone of all modern technology and weapons. Without them, you simply cannot produce weapons or even a modern economy. While they may be abundant across the globe, they are very difficult to refine into usable raw material for production. It's a long and environmentally destructive process that the US was happy to ship to China when the country wasn't viewed by the US as a threat. Now, however, China holds a near monopoly on both rare earth mineral extraction and mining. The most critical elements like gallium and tungsten, which are critical for US contractors to produce high-tech radars and weapons, are almost entirely controlled by China. Due to the US declaring a trade war on China and waging constant warfare around the globe, China has restricted companies from trading rare earth minerals with US companies using them to make weapons. As a result, weapons contractors are delivering planes with empty nose tips where radars were supposed to be, and there are massive delays or outright halts in production of numerous US weapon systems. This exposed that US military supply chains are almost completely reliant on access to Chinese rare earth minerals at some point in their production, causing massive panic at the Pentagon. The crucial thing is that extracting and refining these materials in the West isn't something that can happen in a couple of months or even years. Many experts who are familiar with the industry believe that it could be well over a decade for the US to create supply chains for these resources. Western countries take years to even get the environmental permits to create mining operations. Even if extraction facilities and factories are built, they still don't have the expertise or people qualified to refine them, and would take a massive investment in colleges and training programs to create them. When was the last time you met a metallurgical engineering, extractive metallurgy, or mineral processing engineering major in the West? Probably not often. Meanwhile, China has a massive talent pool and numerous university programs across the country dedicated to these specialties. For the foreseeable future, the US could never sustain a conflict with China, not just because they don't have the manufacturing capacity, but they lack the critical rare earth materials to fuel them even if they did. The seventh and final major reason why China would decisively win this conflict is that the Chinese would have an infinitely larger will to fight this war than America. I'm going to show you two clips right now. I want you to tell me which group you believe is going to fight this to the last person and die for their country.
Scott, why'd you join the army? For my country.
Hey Okoski, why'd you join the army?
To shower with dudes.
Ivor, why'd you join the army?
As long as you okay.
Wait, why'd you join the army?
I flipped a coin.
Why'd you join the Navy? Fuck, stop selling dope.
Why'd you join the army?
I need my citizenship. I'm an illegal bitch.
Ramirez, why'd you join the army? Wait, shit.
I was in Home Depot working, but...
So why'd you join the army?
Curiosity. That's it.
Hey, why'd you join the army?
I don't know, man. I thought that was a good idea at the time, bro.
Hey, why'd you join the Marine Corps?
My high school teacher said I could.
This great nation never bows to any enemy or any force.
Those who dare to invade us are doomed to crash into the Iron Great Wall with bloodshed.
同志们辛苦了！为人民服务！同志们好！同志好！同志们辛苦了！为人民服务！
To which the soldiers reply, "We serve the people."
同志们辛苦了！
So effectively, we have US soldiers who probably couldn't find China on a map, who are fighting for a Camaro or free college, which you could get without joining the military in places like China or Europe. Chinese people would be fighting a defensive war against a country that attacked them and they didn't initiate. The US soldiers also wouldn't be fighting for any values. The veneer that the US actually fights for values has been completely shattered in the past few years. They clearly know now that they are effective mercenaries for the military-industrial complex and the Epstein class. China, on the other hand, is a civilizational state that has carried on for 5,000 years. Also, Chinese officers and naval and military soldiers working on specialized ships or weapon systems all have master's degrees and are highly educated and specialized. There are also rigorous standards for fitness and preparedness, while the US has become bureaucratic and bloated, which was on full display during Trump's military parade.
Special thanks to our sponsor, Lockheed Martin. Special thanks to our sponsor, Palantir.
That's just America's standing army too, which would not be sufficient alone to fight such a war. Any potential conflict would face massive domestic backlash, and it would be impossible to draft the required amount of troops to take on this conflict. China would have no problem in morale or recruiting and would be infinitely more committed to winning this war than your average American soldier. US military officials frequently talk about how China has no experience in fighting wars, while the US does, giving it a huge advantage. First of all this goes to show is how China rose from being one of the poorest countries in the world in the 1970s to the largest economy in the world peacefully. But even the claim that the US war experience gives it a large edge over China is dubious at best. As we covered in this video, the weapon systems of the 21st century will completely change the battlefield, and the US military built around aircraft carriers is obsolete. The US bragging about having more experience from their wars in the last couple decades is like bragging before World War I that their army marches towards enemy lines in the best formation and has the best cavalry charges. They are completely outdated and will be irrelevant in a modern battlefield. Also, if we are keeping score with recent US military experience, it has been massive military failures and defeats in places like Iraq and Afghanistan from far less powerful forces. The Iran war is the closest thing we have to representing China's capabilities. Even if the war ended today, 2 weeks after it started during the time of filming this, what we have seen so far from Iran is already enough to confirm China's likely military strategy. Okay, let's say that after all this information I presented in this video so far, you still think I'm wrong. America's still number one, you're an expert on the US Army, and you know they would win. Well, you don't have to take it from me. You can take it from the literal head of the US Armed Forces, who at least on paper should know much better than anyone else how the US stacks up against China in a potential conflict.
China's Navy is astronomically bigger than what we have now at this point.
China's building an army specifically dedicated to defeating the United States of America. That is their strategic outset. Take hypersonic missiles. Our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and the ability to project power that way strategically around the globe. And if 15 hypersonic missiles can take out our 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like?
Yeah.
In the past X number of years, 10, 12, 15, the Pentagon has a perfect record in all of its war games against China. We lose every time.
So there you have it. Straight from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, Pentagon war games consistently show a decisive defeat for the US Army in any war against China. Military channels on YouTube, think tanks in Washington, D.C., and military analysts love to discuss the arms race between the two countries on pound-for-pound military capabilities in terms of things like tanks, standard-issue rifles, or gear. But honestly, these discussions are completely irrelevant. It doesn't take a military expert to tell that from the location of the possible conflict, manufacturing capacity, access to rare earth minerals, and will to fight alone are more than enough to put this edge far in favor of China. These war hawks in DC think tanks are so dangerous because they don't understand the first thing about China. They don't speak the language, they've never been to the country, and think of China as some Marvel villain or something. These think tanks are constantly pushing towards war with China and are actively putting us at risk of a pointless world-ending war. Once the United States would be defeated in any potential conventional conflict, the whole fate of the world would rest in the hands of US military generals who terrifyingly could end the world in the face of defeat by launching a nuclear weapon. The US in the past was even extremely close to doing this in the Korean War. China has a no-brainer and rational policy in their government of simply saying that they will never be the first country to use a nuclear weapon. They would only ever use it in retaliation as a tool of assurance. The US does not have this policy. Based on the illegal, pointless war of choice in Iran, and the countless destruction caused by the US and its greatest ally in the Middle East, it is clear that these entities in their current state are the greatest threats to world peace. If you are wondering why I didn't talk much about Taiwan specifically in this video, it's because I just made a video about the only realistic resolution to solve the Taiwan conflict that you should watch after this video. But in regards to the island specifically, the mainland has made it very clear that war is an absolute last resort and avoidable at all costs. But in the event of war, it is evident that US war planners really think that the Chinese are so stupid that they just land on the island like it's D-Day, and that all of the conventional ideas about warfare are going to apply like it's World War II. It doesn't take a genius to put 2 and 2 together with the information I stated in this video as to what China's capabilities are and what would likely happen. Regardless of what happens, the US should not be involved in this whatsoever. The government on Taiwan represents the losing side of the Chinese Civil War that is only recognized by 11 countries in the world. It is essentially as if the Confederacy went to Hawaii and declared themselves a country while the entire world still supported the Union government in the US, and China was thinking of military intervening on behalf of the Confederacy. The US has no right to interfere in any other country in the world. After taking 2 million lives in Vietnam, 1 million in Iraq, 400,000 in Afghanistan, and currently thousands in Iran while bombing hospitals, desalination plants, schoolgirls, and volleyball teams, you have to be psychotic to support another intervention. If you support the US intervening in Taiwan and think that this would have anything to do with the ideas of freedom or liberation, you are a clown. It would be purely a war of choice to take down China and maintain US hegemony. That's it. There's no way you can support intervention there or anywhere else in the world. We need to completely demilitarize US policy. War is a terrible thing and completely avoidable. We should never even dream of going to war with China. Hopefully this video has shown you that it's a completely stupid idea, not only morally, but practically. If you want to learn more about the Taiwan conflict, you should watch my video after this. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe, and check out my Substack to find the written version of this video. Follow me on Twitter, and support me on Patreon by clicking the link in the description. See you guys in the next video. Peace.
视频看完了，干货极密，逻辑咬合得非常紧。这期视频最大的价值不在于它得出了中国会赢这个结论，而在于它揭示了21世纪大国竞争的真相。现代战争打的是全产业链的工业底座，打的是资源闭环，打的是基础教育和人才储备。当美国的军工复合体蜕变成一个只顾着吸血分赃，连雷达都交付不出来的利益集团时，他们引以为傲的11艘超级航母，在真正的高超音速饱和打击面前，确实只是一堆昂贵的移动钢铁标靶。但正如博主在最后指出的，中国积攒下这堪称恐怖的工业和军事实力，并不是为了像美国那样去全球搞霸权、炸平民。我们手握利剑，是为了让那些只会听懂大炮语言的人能够心平气和地坐下来跟我们谈和平。大剑无锋，不战而屈人之兵，这才是我们这一代人正在见证的历史转折。欢迎在评论区留下你们的思考，我们下期见。